How's it going, guys? And it is time to talk about WWE 13 in a retrospective. And this is a game that I talked about in my WWE 2K14 retrospective. I talked about the 30 years of WrestleMania. I talked about how I enjoyed the game, and it was the last game in that style that Ukes would give us. And then WWE games would take on a slower, more simulation-based gameplay style. But let's bring it back one game. Let's go back to WWE 13, which is the game that precedes WWE 2K14. And they're pretty similar games. A lot of people have kind of made the argument against this, but the gameplay is basically the same. The controls are pretty much the same. Little tiny differences. And you pretty much have the same game here. The only big difference is the theme of the game. Instead of having all the legends from the 80s, you know, there's no Hulk Hogan here, there's no Macho Man. Instead, we get the Attitude Era. This game is about the Attitude Era. This is the story mode for the game, or as people would refer to it today as like the showcase mode. So this is about the Attitude Era, and it starts from the formation of DX and takes you all the way to WrestleMania 15 when The Rock and Stone Cold threw down in the championship match that defined a generation. And this is a pretty good telling. They split up the story in different categories. We got The Rock section, we have Undertaker and Kane's rivalry, we have the Stone Cold section, we have Mick Foley's section, so everyone gets a chance to shine. And this is a pretty good representation of the Attitude Era roster. You'll be seeing faces like Ken Shamrock, the Big Boss Man. You've even got the Godfather in there. You have Triple H, of course, there's X-Pac. So there is a pretty good choice of wrestlers and a good representation of the Attitude Era. But of course, they're missing some, and some of them are locked behind DLC. You do have Val Venus, Gangrel, Rikishi, and Too Cool that are all DLC. But, you know, what do you expect? They're going to try to get money. This was released during the time when DLC, well, it was still kind of in its infancy a little bit. You know, they'd still been doing it for a few years. But I remember even back then, just as I am now, I just hate DLC. Like, you're paying $60 for a game. You kind of expect a beefier roster. You're promised an Attitude Era roster. And although we have a pretty good selection to choose from, I can't really complain that much about the wrestlers that they did choose for the Attitude Era roster. You definitely would probably want to play as someone like Val Venus and Gangrel, at least to see his entrance. But they're locked behind a paywall, and to me, that's really disappointing. And even when it comes to the current roster in this game, and I will say this, you look at the WWE 13 roster and compare it to the 2K14 roster, and there's not a big difference in this roster. You can see that a lot of these wrestlers are the same. There's not a lot of big differences. They really didn't add. Just a lot of the wrestlers that are DLC, like Ryback and Damian Sandow, they're not DLC in 2K14. So that is very cheap. That's very disappointing. The roster really didn't change too much from 2012 to 2013. There was little minor differences. One or two people were removed. Well, it was basically the same. So really what you're going to concentrate on here, what's the new goods, is really the Attitude Era stuff and the added roster. But who are they missing here? Well, actually quite a few, and you could make the argument that a lot of these are mid-carders. You know, you do have mid-carders. I mentioned you have Godfather. They did give you Big Boss Man. So there are a few. You know, you have the Acolytes, so Bradshaw and Ron Simmons are dressed up as the Acolytes in this game. So you have that, but they're missing Sable, Midian, Viscera, Mean Street Posse, Test, D'Lo Brown, Steve Blackman, Hardcore Holly, Crash, Al Snow, the Hardys, the Dudleys, Droz, the Headbangers, Kurt Angle, the Right to Censor, China. So you can see there's quite a few here, and you can make the argument that, yes, some of these stars like D'Lo Brown, Al Snow, they did have contracts with Impact Wrestling at the time, and so did the Dudleys. But doesn't the WWE own their likenesses? You know, don't they own their names? So I don't understand. I never got this, you know, unless they just didn't want to promote them through the video game, and it probably has a lot to do with that. But I can't help but feel that it's a big gaping hole in the roster, you know, especially when you've got DX. DX is a defining part of the Attitude Era mode, and to not have China there is a big hit. So it's a little bit confusing why they would also have like the Undertaker there, but they avoid doing the Ministry of Darkness stuff because they just don't have the whole roster there. And plus, Gangrel is locked behind DLC. And you know, you do have Edge and Christian there, but it's a little bit disappointing that we do have some notable faces missing from the roster and from the immediate roster. So you've got the missions here in the Attitude Era mode, and you know they're going to ask you to do certain things within a certain amount of time, perform certain moves, take a wrestler over to the announce table. You know, they'll tell you to position your opponent in a certain way, but it does not feel as involved in 2K14. And I mentioned this in my retrospective. You kind of really felt a bit more involved in the matches and moments at hand because they were really demanding. A lot of the mission objectives told you to do very specific things, get into very specific situations. And it's, of course, that game came after this, but that is definitely a good reason for why a lot of people seem to prefer 2K14, because it does get you involved, even though I am more partial to the roster that is in this game because this is the Attitude Era, and this truly is my shit, so to speak. But the level of detail that they put into WWE 2K14, like, you don't even really have the accurate attires. They give you a few attires, but sometimes a wrestler was not wearing a particular attire, and it's not really that accurate. Kind of like what Shawn Michaels is wearing when he's wrestling Stone Cold at WrestleMania 14. He did not wear that. As opposed to in 2K14, they may have not had that match, but they made sure that almost all the attires that the characters were wearing reflected real life. And that was astonishing to me. I even mentioned that in my retrospective. I said, like, wow, they really had attention to detail. There's not really as much attention to detail on that level, which is kind of disappointing. And this is a starting point. I guess Ukes kind of looked at this and they were like, okay, you know, we can really kind of delve a little bit deeper, really show a bigger appreciation for these matches and moments at hand, and really try to authenticate it. And you do see there is definitely more authenticity in 2K14 than here. Certain things kind of seemed a bit skimped on when it comes to the details, but they really did get the moments down. It's nice that they had the commentary really reflect what's going on, and they do have a very good representation of the Attitude here. You have a lot of the big moments. We have Mick Foley getting tossed off the top of the Hell in a Cell by The Undertaker in that classic match. We have the empty arena match from halftime heat between Mankind and The Rock. You have the Stone Cold Vince McMahon steel cage match from St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So a lot of that stuff is here. The Inferno match between Undertaker and Kane. They cover pretty much everything. On top of that, they even add in some additional matches, off the script matches, which are like some mid-card matches that they threw in there. Even something very later on in November 2001, Lita Trish Stratus match, which is just kind of random, and I really didn't expect that. You know, a match that came after Survivor Series 2001. Yeah, I really didn't expect that one. That's kind of like really randomly thrown in there now that I think about it. But you have like Stephanie and Lita for the women's title on Raw as well. So, you know, you have a lot of those really good famous moments just littered throughout this mode. So it's a very satisfying mode. You really get a great appreciation for the Attitude Era. And, you know, if you were just like a newer fan at this time and you never experienced the Attitude Era, playing this mode would kind of make you want to go back and actually watch the real Attitude Era, you know, actually go on YouTube and like search for matches at the time. They didn't have the network at this time, so it would really make you want to go back, and that was something really good. It really put a big spotlight on the Attitude Era, and I remember a lot of people were extremely happy when they decided that that was what they were going to do, that they were going to focus on the Attitude Era for this game, and it ended up being a big success, I think. Now, the other disappointing thing, as I mentioned in 2K14, is that there's no story mode. This is a mode that we last saw in WWE 12, which had the Road to WrestleMania, which was like your story mode, which was completely original storylines. This actually marked the point, WWE 13 marked the point where they were going forward with not doing anything original. And, you know, you did have stuff with creator wrestlers and everything like that. And, of course, you know, you saw this in WWE 2K20 when it really went off the rails. But, you know, playing with the existing roster, it was, you know, kind of a really big letdown for me that you did not have an original story mode, especially since this game came right after WWE 12, which gave you not only a hero mode, but a villain mode where you could play as a face and a heel. And it was pretty exciting, to say the least, to see those two different versions. Now, gone were the days of Here Comes the Pain and branching story pathways. So seeing that would have been really great in this game. Pair that up with the Attitude Era, and you probably would have had one of the best WWE games of all time. But they put all their eggs in one basket. They gave you the Universe mode, which they made a few adjustments to here from WWE 12. But as I said, I had toyed around with Universe mode, and you know, for this playthrough, for this retrospective, I did not go back to it. I toyed around to unlock some characters, and once you go through the Attitude Era mode and do some extra scenarios and matches, you will unlock characters and arenas. You know, there's a lot to unlock, by the way. There's tons of stuff to unlock, which really adds to the longevity of the game. And, you know, you just want to keep playing. You want to play until you unlock everything. So at least the game gives you that. There had been WWE games in the past where everything was unlocked, and that simply did not work out too well. So it was really great to see that, you know, there is plenty to unlock in this game, and, you know, you really feel a sense of accomplishment when you see those wrestlers and all the unlockables just suddenly be unlocked, and the game tells you, and, you know, it's a great sense of satisfaction. But really, overall, I think they were a little bit lazy with this game, because just looking back on it and playing this years later, because the last time I had played it was in, I believe, last time I even touched this game was in early 2013. So coming back to it all these years later, they were a bit skimpy on this game. Oh, they truly were. I mean, do you realize that they only really take you from 1997 to early 1999? And I mean, yeah, you could say, oh, they gave you some off-the-script moments, Brad, so why are you complaining? Well, I think that if you're going to show us that, in your opinion, the Attitude Era ended in the end of 2001, and there is some argument to be made by that. It is controversial among many to say that even the Attitude Era went past the year 2000. Some would even claim 1999 even, but it's debatable. But this is where it ends. I mean, do you realize how much transpired after The Rock and Stone Cold wrestled at WrestleMania 15? And the fact that there's not as much attention paid to detail in the off-the-script matches, because they're not really part of the main mode. Yeah, they do give you missions and everything like that, but they don't really pay as much attention. They don't have all the original commentary and everything. I mean, for God's sakes, in the Stephanie versus Lita off the script match, you have Triple H in long tights, and he hadn't worn long tights in about a year at this point, and here he is wearing his 1999 attire, which is just ridiculous. I mean, did they not notice that? This kind of clearly shows that the off the script was kind of like just a few little extra bullshit matches they just threw in there, you know, just for kicks and giggles. It's kind of not even really a part of the main Attitude Era mode. And when it comes to the main part of the Attitude Era mode, just how in the hell did they miss out on the Ministry of Darkness? That was undoubtedly one of the biggest parts of the Attitude Era, and it's nowhere to be found. Also, you don't get to see any of the DX versus the Nation rivalry, which was huge, a massive rivalry from the summer of 1998. You do get the Rock Triple H match that it did lead up to for SummerSlam 98, but that's it. That's all you get, and that is a really another big omission, to say the least. You don't see a whole lot of the Attitude Era really for an Attitude Era mode. I mean, you see a great deal of it, but they're missing a pretty big chunk of it. Most of 1999. You know, so I think really they could have afforded to have a bit more here, especially if you're not going to have an original story mode. It would be nice to kind of beef up the pre-existing mode, the main mode in the game. At least with 2K14, they give you a pretty sizable portion of WrestleManias, and they work their way all the way to the last possible WrestleMania they could put. Now, I argued that they were missing matches, but they did give you some pretty nice chunks of the cards of WrestleMania that you would want to play, and that would be interesting. So I think they could have put a little bit more effort into it here. And of course, you know, you get a lot of replay value. You could do exhibition matches, and it really is fun, you know, making matches between Attitude Era stars and the current roster. So there is that. But kind of looking back on it, I don't know. You know, there's something just missing from this game. There just could have been a bit more. I don't want to say it's bare bones, because there does seem like there's quite a bit of content here, but I think it's not enough for a modern wrestling game. I kind of look back at some of the old SmackDown games, and I look at Here Comes the Pain and Shut Your Mouth, and you know, the single player is just over way too soon. And to me, in my opinion, like once the single player is done, you've pretty much finished the game, and everything else after that, you kind of just make your own fun, especially in a wrestling game, in a WWE game. So I think a pretty sizable argument could be made that this game just could have had a bit more to it. Of course, people will argue there is universe mode, but that is kind of like exhibition mode. You're kind of making your own fun. Things are a bit on autopilot there, and they're just a bit random. So I would like to have seen some more scripted moments that were original, or, like I said, add on to the Attitude Era mode. You have a pretty big sizable chunk. You barely even covered the year 2000. So, you know, you had a few moments there in the off the script, but there's nothing even in the main mode. So, yeah, the game is a little bit disappointing, really, looking back on it. But it is still fun. And if you could pick it up for cheap, I definitely would recommend it. I did have fun going back to it, and I did have some memories. I don't really have a lot of great memories of this game. I mean, there's some, but I don't feel anywhere, you know, as near and dear to it as I do No Mercy or the first couple of SmackDown games. I mean, those are kind of untouchable when it comes to memories, and of course, WCW NWO Revenge, of course. But anyway, guys, I hope you all enjoyed this look back on WWE 13. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the bells to get all notifications when I post all my new videos. I want to thank all my patrons for your continued support. And thanks again, guys. I'll see you next time.